Canada's premiers wrapped up their annual meeting in Nova Scotia today, with BC's David Eby trying to tie back some big national issues like equalization and defence spending into actual on-the-ground benefits to British Columbians. For more on that, let's check in with Rob Shaw at the BC Legislature. Rob, tell us what our premier had to say today.
Well, Stacey, when you get 13 provincial territorial leaders in a room talking big issues, it can be kind of hard to make it relatable. But there's a couple takeaways here. Eby saying today that he'll support Newfoundland's lawsuit against the federal equalization program, which I know sounds pretty boring, but every British Columbian pays into this federal program with their tax dollars, whether they like it or not. The question is which provinces get money out of it and how. Here's a map of the more than $15 billion in equalization payments this year. Some provinces like PEI and Nova Scotia get more than $3 billion each. You might expect that because their economies are limited. Quebec also at $1.5 billion, which always gets a special deal. But Ontario has received more than $1 billion over the last 2 years and another $38 million this year. Eby says that is outrageous and a sign the program is broken, which is why BC is considering its own lawsuit later this year. It has written the Prime Minister a letter demanding per capita funding for immigration pressures, major infrastructure projects, and more.
It's the federal government's responsibility to ensure that fairness. The equalization formula every 5 years was supposed to be reviewed to prevent perverse outcomes like British Columbia taxpayers sending money to support Ontarians. There's a lot of Ontarians I know and love, including my own mom. But I don't think British Columbia taxpayers should be sending money to support her in Ontario.
The Premier is also agreeing to demand a review into why federal bail reforms for prolific violent offenders last year appear to have failed to work. And they're throwing their support behind global calls for Canada to step up its defence spending by more than $60 billion a year until it reaches a 2% of its GDP mark to meet its NATO requirements. Some of that money could go to military housing and ease housing pressures in Greater Victoria.
The benefit of meeting the NATO obligation. So, for example, we have an armed forces base in Esquimalt. One of the big challenges we face in the Victoria Capital Regional District is housing shortage. The federal government is in early explorations, we understand, about putting military housing on that base for the families to support them so that they're not out looking for housing in the broader community. Putting some military housing in on that base would be a win for us around housing affordability, around vacancy rates, and would move towards addressing some of that expenditure.
So a lot of demands from the premiers for federal help today. Also a warning to Ottawa to butt out of the provincial turf, Stacey, which is kind of the yin and the yang of these premiers' meetings. This is the last one for Premier David Eby before the election. The next premiers meeting in 2025 could be him, could be someone else. That will depend on the outcome of the October provincial election.